Last month, with the help of licensed social worker and psychotherapist Laura Stamboni, Arlington Public News proudly introduced the first of a 6-part series on adolescence, hoping to provide some insights into this challenging and often tense time for parents and other interested viewers. This week, Laura and I are happy to welcome to our discussion John Williams, a licensed marriage and family therapist with an expertise working with boys. Welcome, John.
Thank you.
And Laura,
nice to be here.
Welcome back.
Thank you again.
Let's jump right in. What are the intersecting factors that make this the tumultuous time that it is?
Well, I think that the reason sometimes I think of it that way is that there are so many changes that are major changes that happen in such a short period of time. Mm-hmm. So we have physical changes. Mm-hmm. You talk about those physical changes, emotional changes, and cognitive changes. And I think the way to understand it is to see that they're all coming together in this kind of condensed, very difficult time.
Sure.
So,
sure.
And I would say the physical changes, just to add on to that, is a combination of, for boys and girls, they go through puberty different times. So girls, maybe 11 or 12, boys are maybe a year or two older. Girls develop hips, breasts. Boys get bigger, they get hair, produce sperm. Girls menstruate. So it ends up being, a little bit later for boys, but at the same time, they both ultimately, they're going to go through it, whether they like it or not.
Sure.
And I think that what I was referring to before was the emotional and psychological changes. It's mostly characterized by what some people refer to as the adolescent paradox, in which there's leaving the childhood and childish feelings in that and trying to move in towards adulthood, which is being more independent.
Exactly.
So that's the big struggle that we're going to be coming back to a lot when we talk more about this.
Exactly, and that's too where I wanted to go next. Insofar as certainly the time frame is characterized by these two selves, the child self, the adult self, and the conflicts there. Not only within the child, but then within the wider family and community. What are those two selves doing? What are the child self and the adult self doing within the adolescent? And what is their mission for this period of time?
Well, I think that some of the metaphors that I have of understanding this is almost like driving a car, and you've got the accelerator, which would be moving ahead towards adulthood, and the brakes are keeping you or restraining you in that movement, and you're staying back within the child side of things.
Sure.
And the adolescent is caught right in that conflict. So you're moving back and forth with that. I guess the other image that I had was, especially in terms of parents, was to see this as developmentally in a longer time frame is like an airplane ride. So you start out and it may be smoother, and then when there's turbulence, the pilot says, get back to your seat and fasten your seatbelt.
Sure.
And that would be the adolescent part, and then it smooths out again. So I think it's important for parents to have a longer view of what this whole process is, because when you're in the middle of the turbulence, sometimes that's all you see.
Right.
But this is a much longer perspective. So I think it's important for parents to be able to see that.
Sure.
Well, it's like riding the storm, riding the wave. Basically,
Right.
you need to strap yourself in because you will make it to the other side, but it's going to be tough.
Right. And really, one of the things that you said earlier that resonated with me specifically was, at the end of the day, we need to be able to just sort of breathe through this and recognize that we're going to make it to tomorrow.
Exactly.
That certainly in the moment, things can be very tense, very volatile, and sometimes the best thing to do is to take some distance, take some time, and get back to the mission at a later time.
Yes.
And I think that the idea that you're talking about with distance is, I think if you can maintain that perspective and you can understand a lot of what the behavior is about based upon this inner conflict between the child side and moving towards the adult side, if the parents can continue to understand that, it is going to give you that perspective, and it'll make sense of all these battles that you get drawn into and that happen on a day-to-day basis. And I think that perspective is going to release you from being pulled into it that much more.
Exactly. One of the battles that you refer to, no doubt, is is the arguing. And certainly arguing has a number of connotations, but as it happens in adolescence, it actually has a function.
Right.
Why all the arguing, and how can we parents reframe it so as both to honor it and its part in the adolescent's mission of getting to be an adult, and not pull our hair out in the process.
Right.
Well, I think one of the things, like John had said, is that you have to, as a parent, remember that this is all typical and common.
Right.
And yes, it's easier said than done when
Sure.
you're, getting, yelled at by your teen, your adolescent. But
Right.
really, it's essential that they argue, in a sense, that there's some conflict, because the strongest tie or attachment they have is to the parents in the home.
Sure.
That said, it needs to be broken in order to separate.
Right.
So a lot of the back and forths is really them trying to figure out how to separate while still staying connected.
Right.
It's not an easy thing to do, but I think, again, if parents say to themselves, look, this is a part of adolescence that is typical, then at least they can know that there will be an end in sight. It won't last forever. You know what I mean? So that's my take.
I mean, I think to underscore that, I think parents actually have to see this as healthy.
Yes.
It's necessary. They have to go through this, and it's actually a healthy thing. It's hard to convince people of that when you're caught in the midst of it. But I think a lot of times parents might have this fantasy that it should, because it's hard dealing with conflict. It's hard dealing with the battles every day. So there's going to be a part of the parent that's going to think, I just wish everything was smoother.
Sure.
I wish everything would go more smoothly. And I think sometimes when that happens, you've got another problem on your hands when everything just goes,
Right.
Too smooth, yeah.
when it's too smooth.
Yes,
And
yeah.
maybe there's actually almost too much compliance by the adolescent.
So there's sort of, if I can just say, there's sort of a recalibration in terms of what we consider normal and typical and acceptable.
Yes,
That what it would be certainly odd for we adults to, in our workplace, engage in some of the conflict that we engage with our adolescents at home. But the mantra would seem to be, this is normal, this is okay, this is what my adolescent needs to
This
be
is what
doing
should
right
happen,
now.
basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be the mantra. Although, again, getting driven crazy is not, it's
Yeah.
not easy to stop in the middle and say that.
Right.
But, I mean, I think with adolescents, it's, when they fight, they really, they want to win. And if they lose it, they feel that, the parent has won, and that, the focus is on the parents and their independence. But I think that if that you allow a little bit of fighting, it supports their ability to debate a bit, to be able to support their independence, as well as it's their way of still staying close to home.
I think there's also the element of like when I was saying, like you've got the accelerator and the brakes going on. And I think a lot of times people forget about the pull of wanting to remain in contact with the child side. And everybody, a lot of people will say, because there's all this turbulence, it's all the fighting and that kind of thing. But they actually, the child side holds on very strongly. And you can see this actually developmentally, because you can see it even with 2 or 3 year old kids. They might know how to do something, but they want to be held by mom or dad, and they want to be taken care of. So it's that whole thing about being taken care of. Even with adults, you get pulled back into that thing, returning to the womb or whatever. So that's a really hard thing. But the adolescent and what we were talking about before, the function of the battles and the fights, I mean, it's the perfect way to do it, because the fighting is a way of honoring the need for independence. But then a lot of times, especially, we'll get into this later, but with girls, the continued contact that you get from fighting and engaging the parent is a way of dealing with that side that wants to remain sort of dependent.
Right.
Because it's through the contact.
Yeah.
So it's the fighting and the battling is actually a perfect and beautiful strategy to actually deal with both of those warring sides at the same time.
But I think it's important, too, for parents to remember that even though they're an adolescent, they are still a child as well. So, and a lot of times, I joke.
Absolutely.
I joke, if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it must be a duck. But in this case, it's not necessarily just because they act and talk like an adult in some ways, you're adolescent, they still have that child baby side to them, or baby side to them, that it just wants to be, nurtured and safe and connected. So it is important to remember that even when you're feeling like they're arguing with you, seems very adult-like.
Right.
It's not always necessarily
Right.
the case.
Right.
A lot of times, actually, the battles that you get into are going to be precipitated more by the child in some ways wanting to go back, and wanting to do that. And it gets confusing because the teen is never going to obviously admit any of this stuff. And so you're gonna see the fight, but a lot. And if parents misconstrue that, they lose perspective on it, and that's. And if they don't understand it as well as they might, it creates even more problems. Makes a difficult situation even more difficult.
Sure.
Well, I even have an example of what you're speaking to, John, in that I have had a patient or two who they're adamant that when issues go awry in the family, that they're 16 years old or 17, they need to know what's going on, and they're upset that they were protected from this information. They should be told this. So then the parents tell the teenager, and the teenagers were just distraught and devastated and couldn't handle the information and needed to sleep in their parents' bed that night. Which the teenager did not share that with me. Because they were embarrassed, they didn't want to acknowledge that the child/baby side to them. But yet, that's an example of a time when they want to be treated like adults and that they can handle things, but they actually they can't handle all of what they think, and they still need to be treated like a child as well.
Right.
Yeah.
The two selves.
Yes.
And if the parents can remember that there are the two selves simultaneously, that makes understanding what's going on so much easier.
Right. And let me take that a step further. The two selves. Certainly, those who are parents of adolescents have heard in the past when their adolescent returns home, perhaps after a sleepover, an activity with a friend, and the parent of the friend brings them back and says, "Geez, your daughter is just a joy. She is welcome anytime."
That's the best.
And we parents know the look. It's the...
You don't know they're talking about the same person.
Really?
Is this my child you're talking about?
So why a joy out in the world, and at home an overdramatic, upset, arguing teen? What's going on?
I think Laura kind of talked about that a second ago when she said that the parents, the home, and the family is the biggest bond that the kids have when they're growing up. So to become more independent from that, that's where the battles have to take place.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and that's a really common story where you hear that they're out doing something. You may have trouble getting them to take the trash out, do dishes.
Sure.
Yet they're over at somebody else's house.
doing
They
it.
help with the dishes,
Yes.
and they're doing exactly the same thing that they refuse to do at home. And then you get into these conversations, and the parent doesn't know if they're talking about the same
Well, the parents
person.
feel disrespected,
Right.
but it's not even as advanced as that. It's more that they, and all of this, much or most, if not all of this, is unconscious for the adolescent. But that, they feel safest at home, so this is where their attachment is. This is where they're struggling with separating and staying in contact. So when they leave and they go outside to a friend's parents, they don't have that attachment with them.
Right.
So it's not the same. So it's to remind parents that that's the case.
Right. And so for us to wonder, geez, which is our real child? Obviously, both
They're
are
both.
their real child.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think in terms of why sometimes I think parents lose their perspective and they get so upset with their child because they're not doing any of these things. Typically, seeing how they operate out in the outside world is probably, in the long term, a better gauge of what they're really going to be doing.
Okay.
So if the parent thinks they're not doing any of the stuff around the house and they're going to end up being these lazy, indolent adults, that's not the case. It's just that that's part of the battle that they have at home. But
Right.
what they see in the outside world, that's probably a much better gauge of
Right.
what's probably going to go on and how they're going to be as adults.
Yes.
Okay. All right. One of the other things certainly that comes up at this time of life, are upsets, yeah? Upsets that at one time seemed manageable for our kids, become magnified, become life-ending dramas for adolescents. Why the intensity and what seems like a complete loss of perspective during this time?
Well, it's because, you know, these developing adolescents, they don't know these new feelings, these new emotional feelings, these new sexual feelings. They don't know how to regulate it yet. They haven't learned, they don't know what to look at or what to look for. So they're really trying to figure out how to deal with that. And adolescents are used to looking in the here and now. Excuse me. They're used to looking in the here and now, not the longer term perspective. So it makes it very difficult when the parent is talking about long-term perspective and the adolescent is talking about the here and now. And the adolescent wants to know, why can't they go over to, excuse me, why can't they go over to, you know, Jen's house tomorrow? The whole focus is on Jen's house. Why can't, but the bigger picture is something that they just can't see, and they're just not able to manage that there is, you know, there'll be another day to go to Jen's house. You can go the next day after, you know, but they just can't see. So it's very difficult for them because you have to think there's an onslaught of feelings that are just developing and rushing into them, and they just don't know how to sort out. And that's why it's important that we talk about it with parents, and we help parents in how to approach their kids about it, you know?
I think also it's a time when there's all these growing pressures, you know, like doing well in school, sports, friendships, and with all these increasing pressures, there's much more stress on the kids, which is going to basically feed into that intensity that you're talking about at this point. And I think you know what Laura was saying is that all these added pressures, this is probably the first time that the teen or these kids have dealt with that kind of a pressure load. And since they don't have any experience, they don't know what that sense is like, whether there's light at the end of the tunnel. And that really what it does is it condenses the experience down so that it's just, that's how they get caught. Like this is the end of the world, this whatever this thing is, or I have to go over and see this friend of mine. Or, well, you know, an adult perspective might be, well, look, you can see him the next day, you can talk on the phone, there's other alternatives. But they have said, you know, and they can't trust that things are going to work out like that because they haven't gone through these as adults have.
This conversation, like the adolescent mission itself, has been full, but we hope that you found it illuminating. On behalf of Laura Stamboni and John Williams, I'm Peter Bermudez for Arlington Public News.